July 15, 1868. The Paraná River steamed under a merciless sun, thick with the smell of blood, gunpowder, and rotting flesh. In a shallow trench carved into the red earth of Tuyuti, Captain José Ignacio Garmendia wiped sweat from his eyes and stared at the impossible numbers chalked on a scrap of rawhide. 120,000 Brazilian, Argentine, and Uruguayan soldiers, 450 modern artillery pieces, 40 ironclad warships choking the river. Against them, 22,000 Paraguayans left alive, 7,000 of them women and boys under 15, 60 cannon total, most handmade from church bells and scrap iron, ammunition less than 30 rounds per gun. The Allied generals called it the final campaign. In Asunción, Marshal Francisco Solano Lopez called it Tuesday. José was 26, born in a village that no longer existed. His uniform was cotton rags dyed with berry juice. His boots were raw cowhide tied with wire, and the machete at his hip had belonged to his father before Brazilian bayonets took him at Curupaiti. He looked at the women loading the cannon beside him and felt something colder than fear. They called themselves the residentas. They had no shoes, no husbands, no mercy. Their hair was cropped short so it wouldn't catch fire when they rammed powder down a glowing barrel. Their commander was a 34-year-old widow named Maria Agustina Ramirez, who had lost 3 sons in one afternoon at Acastañu, and still smiled like she had secrets the enemy would never guess. Maria knelt beside José, pressed a clay cup of caña into his hand. "Drink, Capitan. Tonight we teach them geometry." He laughed once, a cracked sound. "There are no angles left, mi comandante, only graves." She tapped the rawhide map with a finger black from powder. "Graves are angles, José. We just have to choose whose." Across the river, the Brazilian flagship Rio Grande steamed past, her 10-inch guns gleaming like teeth. Aboard her, Admiral Joaquín Márquez Lisboa studied the same map through a telescope and saw only a starving country waiting to die. He had no idea the dying had already started planning his funeral. In the Paraguayan camp, the women sang while they worked. Not hymns, old harvest songs, the ones their grandmothers used when planting mandioca. They sang because the rhythm kept the rammers steady, because the Brazilians hated the sound, and because singing made the children believe tomorrow might still come. José watched a 12-year-old girl named Damiana carry a 40-pound cannonball on her head as calmly as if it were a basket of oranges. She caught his stare and grinned, teeth white against soot-black skin. "Don't worry, Theo, we practiced." Practiced. That was the word Maria used for everything now. They had practiced digging trenches so narrow the enemy shells sailed overhead, practiced dragging cannon by hand at night so the moon wouldn't betray them, practiced turning every stream, every ridge, every patch of Carandai palms into a killing box. Because Paraguay had no steel left, no saltpeter, no hope, but it still had women who remembered exactly where every path through the monte ended, and boys who could run barefoot faster than Brazilian cavalry could ride. Maria stood on a crate, voice low so the wind wouldn't carry it across the water. "Listen well, my hijas. Tomorrow the Triple Alliance crosses at Angostura. They think the bends will hide them. They are wrong. The bend hides us." She drew 3 quick lines in the dirt with her machete. 1 arrow from the north, 1 from the south, 1 straight down the throat. They will come in perfect parade formation because they believe we are finished. We are going to remind them that finished things can still bite. José felt the old rage rise, hot and clean. He looked at the faces around him, sun-browned, hungry, beautiful, terrible, and understood something Marshal Lopez never had. This war was no longer about land or pride or even survival. It was about making the enemy pay so much for every inch that history would choke on the price. Maria's eyes found his across the firelight. "Tomorrow," she said, "we do not fight for Paraguay. Paraguay is already in our blood. Tomorrow, we fight so that when their grandchildren read about this war, they will whisper our names with fear." The residentas raised their machetes in silence. 60 blades caught the dying sun and turned it red. Far away in Rio de Janeiro, Emperor Dom Pedro II slept beneath silk sheets, dreaming of victory parades. He did not dream of the women sharpening those blades on river stones, singing the same songs their mothers had sung while giving birth in the fields. José drained the caña, felt it burn all the way down. He looked at Maria one last time and saw not a commander, not a widow, not even a woman. He saw the country itself, barefoot and furious, walking toward the river with murder in her smile. Tomorrow, the world would learn a new kind of mathematics. Not how many men it takes to win a war, but how many graves it takes to lose one. July 16, 1868. Dawn came red over Angostura like a fresh wound. The Triple Alliance crossed the Paraná in perfect order. 20,000 men in crisp white uniforms, bands playing, flags snapping, ironclads pounding the shore with shells the size of oxen. They expected screams, surrender, maybe a few ragged volleys from starving ghosts. They got silence first, then geometry. Maria Agustina Ramirez stood barefoot on the forward parapet, hair tied back with a strip of red flag torn from a dead Brazilian. She raised one hand. Behind her, the residentas waited in trenches no deeper than a man's waist, cannon loaded with nails, broken glass, and whatever iron scraps the children had scavenged from burned villages. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Every woman knew her angle, every child his path. The first Brazilian wave hit the killing ground at 7:30. Colonel Ignacio Ares, commander of the 2nd Argentine Infantry, rode at the front on a black horse, saber flashing. He saw the low earthworks, the silent women, the boys with spears made from bayonets lashed to broom handles, and laughed out loud. "Look, boys, Lopez sends his kitchen maids to greet us." Maria dropped her hand. 60 cannon fired at once, not in rolling volleys like civilized armies, all at once, a single thunderclap of scrap iron and rage. The front rank of Argentines simply disappeared. Men, horses, colors, everything shredded into red mist. The second rank tried to halt, but the men behind kept pushing, officers screaming, bugles blowing advance, because retreat was unthinkable. They walked straight into the second surprise. The trenches weren't straight. They zigzagged like lightning bolts, each turn a new field of fire. Paraguayan women rose from the earth like demons, rammed home another charge, fired again before the smoke cleared. Boys darted between the guns with powder kegs on their backs, laughing because fear had burned out of them years ago. On the left flank, Captain José Ignacio Garmendia led 400 women and old men through the Caranday palms. They moved in single file, silent as snakes, machetes wrapped in cloth so the blades wouldn't flash. Their job was simple: let the Brazilians pass and cut the road behind them. No prisoners, no noise, just close the trap. By 8:15, the Allied vanguard was inside the pocket. Ironclads couldn't depress their guns low enough to hit the trenches. Brazilian cavalry tried to charge and found the ground laced with hidden pits lined with sharpened bamboo. Horses screamed, riders fell, residentas rose from the grass and finished them with machetes. Admiral Lisboa on the Rio Grande watched through his telescope and felt something cold crawl up his spine. The Paraguayan fire wasn't random, it was coordinated. Every cannon shot came from a different angle, forcing his men to turn, exposing flanks, bunching together. He saw a woman, no older than 20, stand on a parapet, reload a cannon by herself, fire point-blank into a company of Uruguayan grenadiers, then wave mockingly at his ship before the next shell exploded behind her and she simply wasn't there anymore. At 9 o'clock, the second wave tried to flank north. They ran straight into Maria's masterpiece, a shallow stream that looked harmless on the maps. The Brazilians waded in, knee-deep, laughing at the lack of resistance. Then the women upstream released the dam they had built all night from logs and corpses. A wall of water roared down the channel, carrying rocks, tree trunks, and the bloated bodies of yesterday's dead. The entire Brazilian
by shrapnel, but she worked the sponge staff with her right like it was an extension of her body. "They're breaking," he shouted over the roar. "The Brazilians are pulling back to the river." Maria spat blood and smiled. "Good. Let them run. Running men leave trails." She looked toward the east, where the sun burned white over the killing ground. "Tonight we follow the trails. Tonight we teach them what happens when you invade a country that has already turned itself into a blade." Behind her, the residentas kept firing, kept singing, kept counting bodies the way farmers count sheaves of wheat. The Triple Alliance had come for conquest. They were learning one grave at a time that some countries would rather die standing than live on their knees, and that the women of Paraguay had decided long ago which way they preferred to fall. July 16th, 1868, dusk. The sun bled out behind the palms, and the battlefield turned the color of old rust. The Allied retreat became a rout. Brazilian soldiers threw away rifles to run faster. White uniforms turned red and brown. Officers shot their own horses to keep them from falling into Paraguayan hands. The ironclad steamed backward, firing blindly into the smoke because no one knew where the next attack would come from. Maria Agostina Ramirez watched from a broken parapet, left arm tied against her chest with a strip of enemy flag, face black with powder, but eyes shining like obsidian. "Now, hijas," she said softly. "Now we hunt." The residentas rose from the trenches like ghosts. 1,200 women and boys armed with machetes, lances made from broken bayonets, a few captured Remington rifles, and pure hate. They moved in small groups of 10, no bugles, no drums, only the soft whisper of bare feet on hot earth. José Ignacio Garmendia walked at Maria's side, carrying a captured Argentine saber in his good hand. "We have no ammunition left," he said. "We have the night," she answered. The first group found a Brazilian field hospital half a mile from the river. 200 wounded men lying on bloody cots, surgeons still cutting, priests giving last rites. The residentas walked in singing the old Mandioca song. The surgeons looked up and understood. The priests closed their books. No one screamed for long. The second group hit the ammunition train parked on the riverbank. Guards ran when they saw children with torches. The wagons exploded one after another, turning the Paraná into a lake of fire that lit the sky for miles. Ironclads tried to shell the flames, but only succeeded in setting their own decks alight when burning debris fell aboard. Admiral Lisboa stood on the bridge of Rio Grande, watching his fleet burn, and for the first time in his career felt fear that had nothing to do with enemy guns. By midnight, the residentas owned the darkness. They knew every path, every stream, every place where the ground turned soft and swallowed horses whole. Brazilian soldiers who managed to reach the river found the boats gone, cut loose and sent drifting downstream on fire. Paraguayan boys swam like fish, climbed the ironclad anchor chains, dropped burning rags into powder rooms. One monitor exploded with a roar that shook the earth, her magazine cooking off in a pillar of white fire that lit the clouds. José and Maria moved with 30 women toward the Allied command tent. They found it by the light of lanterns, guards half asleep, General Argolo himself writing frantic dispatches by candlelight. Maria stepped into the tent first, machete low, blood already drying on her skirt. Argolo looked up, saw a barefoot woman with one arm in a sling and a smile sharp as broken glass, and reached for his revolver, too late. The Residentas took no prisoners that night, but they took everything else. Letters, maps, gold braid, boots, watches, the general's own sword with its ivory hilt. They left the bodies arranged in a perfect circle, facing outward, hands tied with their own bootlaces, mouths stuffed with pages torn from the victory proclamations they had been writing that morning. At 3 a.m, Maria stood on the riverbank watching the last ironclad limp away, trailing smoke and fire. She turned to José. "Count the cost." He walked the field with a torch. 12,000 Allied dead or missing in one day, more than the entire Paraguayan army had numbered at sunrise. 180 cannon captured or destroyed, 30 boats sunk or burning. The Residentas had lost 411. Maria heard the number and nodded once. "Good trade," she said. José stared at her. "We are finished, Maria. There is nothing left." "There is tomorrow," she answered. She pointed north, where the road to Asunción lay open for the first time in 4 years. "They think we are broken. Now we show them what broken looks like when it starts walking toward you with a blade." Behind them, the children were already stripping the dead, taking boots, belts, cartridges, anything that could be used again. Damiana, the 12-year-old, walked past carrying a Brazilian officer's head by the hair, using it as a lantern because she had stuck a candle in the mouth. She smiled at José, the same way she had smiled when carrying the cannonball. "We practiced," she said, and kept walking. The Residentas began to sing again, softer now, a lullaby their mothers had sung to babies who would never be born. The Allies heard it across the water and shivered in their burning ships because they finally understood the song was not for the living. It was for the dead, who had about to have company. July 17, 1868. The Residentas did not wait for dawn. They started walking north at moonset, 1,200 women, boys, old men, and whatever walked on 2 legs and carried hate. 20,000 Allied corpses lay behind them like a carpet of broken toys, but Maria Agustina Ramirez looked only forward. Her left arm was now black and swollen, gangrene starting, but she tied it tighter with a Brazilian officer's gold braid and kept the pace. "We do not stop until Piribebui, or hell," she told José. "Hell is behind us," he answered. "Then Asunción it is." They moved light, no wagons, no tents, only what they carried. Machetes, captured rifles with 20 rounds each, sacks of dried mandioca stolen from dead men's haversacks, and water gourds filled from the blood-warm river. Children ran ahead like dogs, scouting, marking trails with slashes on tree bark. The column looked like refugees until you saw their eyes. Then it looked like the end of the world. By noonfall, the first Allied pursuit caught them. 3,000 Brazilian cavalry under Colonel Fernandes, fresh horses, Spencer carbines, orders to finish the rabble. They found the Residentas resting in a palm grove, women sitting in the shade, boys sharpening machetes on stones. Fernandes formed line, bugles sounded, charge, lances lowered. The horses never reached the trees. The ground in front of the grove was red earth that looked solid. After 4 years of war, the women knew every lie the land could tell. They had spent the night digging shallow trenches, covering them with palm fronds and a thin layer of dirt. The first rank of cavalry vanished into the pits, horses screaming, legs broken, riders pitched forward into a second surprise, caltrops made from bent nails welded together. When the second rank tried to wheel, the residentas rose from the grass and fired one volley, exactly one, because ammunition was sacred. Then they charged with machetes. Fernandez died in the first 10 seconds, his horse gutted beneath him, his face opened from eyebrow to chin by a 13-year-old girl who took his gold epaulets as a souvenir. The cavalry broke and ran straight into the monte, where more children waited with slings and stones the size of oranges. Half the pursuit never came out again. The other half reached the river and told stories no one believed about barefoot women who fought like jaguars and laughed while they killed. By nightfall, the residentas had covered 30 miles and left 3,000 fresh graves as payment. They camped in an abandoned estancia, roasted beef over fires made from Brazilian ammunition boxes. Maria sat apart, fever burning in her eyes, the smell of death coming from her arm. José necked to her with the captured surgeon's saw. "We cut it now or you die." "We cut it now or you die," she said without hesitation, "but you hold the blade." He heated the saw in the fire until it glowed, poured caña over the stump site, tied a leather belt between her teeth. She never made a sound. When it was done, she spat out the belt, looked at the cauterized stump, and laughed once. Lighter now, good for swinging. Then she stood up and addressed the camp with her new one-armed.
City had been Paraguayan once. Now it was the last lock on the road to Asuncion, and the Triple Alliance meant to hold it forever. Maria Agostina Ramirez arrived at dawn with 800 left. Half the residentas walked on broken feet. The other half carried the wounded on their backs. They looked like scarecrows made of blood and rage, but their eyes still burned. The Allies saw them coming across the open plain and laughed so hard some officers fell off their horses. 800 women against 50,000. General Argolos' replacement, the Count de, wiped tears from his eyes. This war ends today. He ordered the gates opened and the cavalry to form for the kill. Maria stopped the column 500 meters from the walls, raised her one good arm, and the residenta sat down in the grass as calmly as if they were waiting for church. She sent Damiana forward with a white flag made from a priest's surplice. The girl walked alone to the main gate, 12 years old, barefoot, carrying the severed hand of Colonel Fernandez on a stick like a lantern. The Count de met her on the wall. "Tell your witch we offer mercy if she surrenders now." Damiana smiled up at him with soot-black teeth. "Mi comandante says mercy is for people who still have something to lose. She says, open the gates and we will show you what women do when the losing is already done." The Countess laughed again and ordered the artillery to fire. One cannonball took Damiana's head clean off. The body stood for 3 heartbeats, blood fountaining, then fell. The severed hand rolled to the foot of the wall. Maria watched through a captured telescope, face unreadable. Then she lowered the glass and spoke one word. "Ahora." The residentas did not charge, they dug. The plain in front of Piribebuy looked flat and harmless. After 4 years, the women knew better. They had spent every night since Angostura digging not trenches, tunnels, shallow, narrow, just wide enough for a child or a crawling woman, running under the grass like mole runs, packed with captured gunpowder and broken glass bottles filled with kerosene. 800 women and boys had carried the loads in their skirts, buried them, covered them with dirt and prayers.
When Maria said, "Ahora," 300 children lit the fuses and ran. The explosion started at the walls and walked inward like the footsteps of God. The first blast tore a hole the size of a house in the main gate. The second lifted an entire bastion into the air and dropped it on the cavalry forming behind it. The third, fourth, fifth, sixth turned the perfect white tent squares into firestorms. Allied soldiers ran screaming, uniforms burning, horses bolting with manes on fire. The Count de watched his invincible fortress come apart from underneath, and for one moment looked exactly like a man who had bet everything on the wrong kind of mathematics. Then the residenta stood up and walked forward, not running, walking, machetes low, singing the Mandioca song. They entered Piribebui through fire and smoke and falling stone. The fighting lasted 3 hours and was not fighting. It was harvesting. Cannon crews died at their guns, bayoneted, throats cut, heads smashed with rammers. Women dragged officers from their horses and took their time. Infants were found in the hospital and carried out alive, the only mercy shown that day. Maria walked through the burning streets with her stump dripping fresh blood, looking for the Count de. She found him in the cathedral, kneeling before the altar, trying to pray in French. She stood behind him until he felt the shadow. "Stand up," she said. He turned, face pale, golden braid torn. "You are animals." "No," she answered. "We are mothers who ran out of milk and decided your blood would do." She took his own sword from his hand and used it one-armed. The head rolled across the marble and stopped at the feet of the Virgin Mary. Maria looked up at the statue, crossed herself with the bloody stump, and whispered, "Perdónanos." Outside, the residentas counted the cost. 512 dead, including most of the children. The city was theirs. Piribebui burned for 2 days, the smoke visible all the way to Asuncion. The road north now lay open like a wound. The Count de's head went on a pole at the gate with a sign in 3 languages. "We are still walking." Marshal Lopez received the news in his palace and for the first time since 1864 felt fear crawl into his bones. Elisa Lynch packed her jewels and asked for a ship. He told her there were no more ships. Maria sat on the cathedral steps at midnight, fever eating her alive, and wrote orders on a piece of charred paper with her own blood. "We do not stop. The children we could not save march with us now. Tell the next city we are coming. Tell them the residentas are tired of graves that are not theirs." August 12, 1869. Acostañu, the final field. A year after Angostura, the residentas were down to 347 souls. Most were children under 14, and women missing eyes, arms, breasts, everything but the will to walk north. They wore patchwork armor made from quilted blankets stuffed with cotton, captured Brazilian helmets too big for their heads, and necklaces of human ears taken from officers who had laughed too soon. The Allies had learned. They no longer laughed. They brought 100,000 men, repeating rifles, Gatling guns, observation balloons, and orders from Emperor Pedro himself: burn everything, salt the earth, leave no Paraguayan breathing older than 10. The residentas reached Acostañu at dawn, a wide plain of dry grass ringed by low hills. Maria Agostina Ramirez rode at the front on a horse stolen from a dead general, her stump wrapped in gold cloth torn from the Countess' uniform. Fever had hollowed her cheeks, her remaining hand shook on the reins, but her voice still carried like a cathedral bell. She stopped the column and looked back at the ragged line, boys with sticks for rifles, girls carrying babies they had found in burned villages, old women who had buried every child they ever bore and now carried machetes instead of rosaries. She said, "Today we do not retreat. Today we choose the place where Paraguay ends, and we make it so expensive that the world will never forget the price." The children cheered with voices that had forgotten how to be children. Across the plain, the Allied army deployed in perfect European formation, bands playing, flags bright as fresh blood. The Countess' replacement, the Duke of Caxias, watched through field glasses and felt nothing but cold duty. He had lost too many friends to these barefoot demons. Today there would be no prisoners, no quarter, no mercy. The battle began at 8 with artillery. Shells fell like iron rain. The Residentas had no trenches left to dig, no tunnels, no tricks. They simply stood in the open grass and sang. The first Allied charge came at 10:20, 20,000 Brazilian infantry in blue coats, bayonets fixed. The Residentas met them with children in front. Boys and girls 8 to 12 years old, armed with lances made from sharpened bamboo and the bones of their own dead brothers. They ran forward screaming names, the names of villages that no longer existed, of mothers raped and burned, of futures stolen before they began. The Brazilians fired volleys that cut the children down like wheat, but the children kept coming, climbing over their own dead, stabbing horses in the belly, pulling riders down into the grass where the women waited with machetes. By noon, the plain was a slaughter yard. Gatling guns chattered like angry birds, mowing lines through the Residentas, but every time a woman fell, 2 more stepped into her place. Maria rode up and down the line on her stolen horse, hoarse voice swinging a captured saber with her. She went to her knees, looked once toward Asunción, and smiled with burned lips. The battle ended at sunset. 20,000 Allied dead, every Paraguayan on the field dead or dying. The Duke of Caxias walked among the ashes and found a small circle of charred bodies holding hands. In the center lay Maria's saber blade, melted hilt still wrapped in gold cloth from a dead count's uniform. He ordered the bodies buried with full military honors. His soldiers refused. They were afraid of ghosts. That night, the wind carried the smell of burned children all the way to Asunción. Marshal Lopez hanged himself 6 months later rather than face what he had made. Emperor Pedro II won the war, but lost his empire's soul, because every night for the rest of his life he heard small voices singing in the flames, and knew the price had been too high. Paraguay died that day, but refused to stay dead. In every schoolbook in Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, children still learn the name Acosta Nu and whisper it like a curse, because on that field, 300 women and children taught the world that some countries would rather burn than bend, and that the Residentas are still walking somewhere in the dark with murder in their smile and fire at their feet. March 1st, 1870. Cerro Cora, the last camp. Francisco Solano Lopez sat in a silk tent drinking French cognac, while the remnants of his army, fewer than 400 men, guarded a circle of wagons. Elisa Lynch painted her lips and counted diamonds because tomorrow did not exist anymore. Outside the tent, the jungle pressed close, hot and wet with the smell of coming rain. 300 Allied soldiers had tracked them for weeks, Brazilian, Argentine, Uruguayan, all tired of the war but ordered to finish it. At dawn, the attack came quick and merciless. Lopez tried to mount a horse, but a bullet took him in the leg. He fell into the stream shouting, "Muero con mi patria! I die with my country." A Brazilian sergeant named Chico Diabo put a bayonet through his throat to make sure. Elisa Lynch knelt in the mud, clutching her dead lover, and screamed at the soldiers, "Shoot me too, if you dare." They did not. She buried Lopez with her bare hands, wrapped him in the Paraguayan flag, and cursed every name she knew. The war of the Triple Alliance ended not with trumpets, but with a woman's scream in the mud and the sound of diamonds scattering in the dirt. Paraguay was gone. 90% of the men dead, women reduced from 300,000 to less than 30,000, children almost none. The land lay empty, fields returning to jungle, villages erased from maps. Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay divided the corpse, took the best land, left the bones to bleach under the sun. But the residentas did not die with their bodies. In the years that followed, Brazilian soldiers on night patrol heard singing in the monte and found no one. Argentine settlers woke to find their cattle throats cut, arranged in perfect circles with a child's footprint in the middle. Uruguayan priests discovered altars in abandoned churches made from enemy skulls and wildflowers. In schools across the victors' countries, teachers told the official story of glorious victory, but children passed a different version under desks. A Costa Nu, they whispered, the field where the children burned, and kept walking. Piribebui, where the women blew up a city from underneath. Angostura, where barefoot ghosts sank ironclads with nothing but hate and geometry. Every March 1st, the anniversary of Lopez's death, women in black appear on the roads of Paraguay, barefoot, carrying machetes wrapped in red cloth. They walk from village to village, singing the Mandioca song, and no one stops them because even the priests cross themselves and look away. In 1920, a Brazilian expedition went looking for lost gold in the Chaco. They found a circle of stones in a clearing. In the center lay a rusted saber wrapped in gold cloth, now black with age. On the blade, someone had carved with a bayonet, Maria Augustina Ramirez, 1868-1869. No soy víctima, soy la tormenta. I am not the victim. I am the storm. The soldiers left the saber where it was and never spoke of the singing they heard on the way out. In 1954, when Stroessner ruled with an iron fist, schoolgirls in Asunción began wearing red ribbons in their hair on August 1st, the day of a Costa Nu. The dictatorship banned it. The ribbons multiplied. In 1989, when the dictatorship fell, the first free parade in 50 years was led by old women with one arm missing or eyes burned white, carrying photographs of children who never grew up. Behind them marched 10,000 schoolgirls, all wearing red ribbons and singing the song their great-grandmothers died singing. Today, if you travel the back roads of Paraguay at night, you might see lights moving in the monte. Not lanterns, not flashlights, just soft glows like candles carried by small hands. Old people say it is the residentas, still walking, still counting graves, still making sure the price is never forgotten. They say if you are Brazilian, Argentine, or Uruguayan and your car breaks down on those roads, leave a gift on the dashboard, a coin, a flower, a drop of blood. The lights will pass you by. If you laugh or take pictures, the car starts again, but you never reach home. Some stories are bigger than victory. Some defeats cut deeper than any sword. Paraguay lost everything, land, men, future.
but it kept the one thing no treaty can take away, the memory of barefoot women and burning children who looked at 3 empires and said, "Come and take it if you can." The residentas are gone from the earth, but every time a small country stands against impossible odds, every time someone with nothing left chooses to burn rather than kneel, somewhere in the dark, Maria Agustina Ramirez smiles with charred lips, raises her one good arm, and the Mandioca song begins again. Because some wars are not won by the living, they are won by the dead who refuse to stay quiet. March 1st, 1870. Cerro Cora, the last camp. Francisco Solano Lopez sat in a silk tent drinking French cognac, while the remnants of his army, fewer than 400 men, guarded a circle of wagons. Elisa Lynch painted her lips and counted diamonds because tomorrow did not exist anymore. Outside the tent, the jungle pressed close, hot and wet with the smell of coming rain. 300 Allied soldiers had tracked them for weeks, Brazilian, Argentine, Uruguayan, all tired of the war but ordered to finish it. At dawn, the attack came quick and merciless. Lopez tried to mount a horse, but a bullet took him in the leg. He fell into the stream shouting, "Muero con mi patria! I die with my country." A Brazilian sergeant named Chico Diabo put a bayonet through his throat to make sure. Elisa Lynch knelt in the mud, clutching her dead lover, and screamed at the soldiers, "Shoot me too if you dare." They did not. She buried Lopez with her bare hands, wrapped him in the Paraguayan flag, and cursed every name she knew. The War of the Triple Alliance ended not with trumpets, but with a woman's scream in the mud and the sound of diamonds scattering in the dirt. Paraguay was gone, 90% of the men dead, women reduced from 300,000 to less than 30,000, children almost none. The land lay empty, fields returning to jungle, villages erased from maps. Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay divided the corpse, took the best land, left the bones to bleach under the sun. But the residentas did not die with their bodies. In the years that followed, Brazilian soldiers on night patrol heard singing in the monte and found no one. Argentine settlers woke to find their cattle throats cut, arranged in perfect circles with a child's footprint in the middle. Uruguayan priests discovered altars in abandoned churches made from enemy skulls and wildflowers. In schools across the victors' countries, teachers told the official story of glorious victory, but children passed a different version under desks. A Costa Nu, they whispered, the field where the children burned, and kept walking. Piribebui, where the women blew up a city from underneath. Angostura, where barefoot ghosts sank ironclads with nothing but hate and geometry. Every March 1st, the anniversary of Lopez's death, women in black appear on the roads of Paraguay, barefoot, carrying machetes wrapped in red cloth. They walk from village to village, singing the Mandioca song, and no one stops them because even the priests cross themselves and look away. In 1920,